Hello and welcome to Cover, our semi-regular review of sporting books where I give you my opinion of what's on the bookshelves at the moment. If you've got a book you'd like us to review, then we would love to hear from you. And there's the email address. It is sean.everett@supersport.com. Right, let's crack on with today's book, and it is this one, Yarnir by Dugald MacDonald, published by Flyleaf, in the shops now, retailing at £295. Also available at all the usual online sites and indeed from Flyleaf. I have to thank the Western Province coach John Dobson for turning me on to this one. And John actually wrote one of the blurbs, and I quote, "By far the most entertaining and amusing South African rugby book ever written." Now, ordinarily we would write off such bombast, and ordinarily I would wait until the end of my review to tell you of its merits or otherwise, but just this once I'm going to tell you, go out and buy this book. Or if you happen to be ducking the third wave, stay in and buy this book, but buy this book. I should also shout out to the bookshops and the online sites, because this is the sort of book that doesn't belong in the ghetto of sports sections, ignored by serious book buyers, but should be in shop windows and on home pages. This is a crossover book, nominally about rugby, but actually about South Africa, about life, about the good old days and the bad old days. So what's it actually about? Well, it's about one day in the life of Dugald MacDonald, the most significant day of his rugby career, since it was his one and only test match, and it happened to be against Willie John McBride's all-conquering British and Irish Lions team of 1974. There are excursions, but essentially this book is about a particular time and a particular place. The 22nd of June 1974, second test match between the Springboks and the Lions at Loftus Versfeld in Pretoria. I could get literary here and mention that it's only 6 days and 70 years after Bloomsday, the annual celebration of James Joyce's Ulysses, which is set on the 16th of June 1904. But I don't want to put you off, and I could as easily mention Alain Recherche du Temps Perdu, Marcel Proust's masterpiece, because Yarnir is about the persistence of memory, in this case the way a chance encounter in a second-hand shop with a dog-eared copy of Huisgenoot and an LP recording of the second test prompted Dugald to sit down and take stock of his life. But again, I don't want to put you off. Let me rather say you don't have to be a rugby fan to enjoy this book, but if you are a rugby fan of a certain age, you will have a whale of a time. In many ways, it's a love letter to the late Gerrit Viviers. For many years, the voice of South African rugby. As a commentator myself, I was enthralled by Dugald's forensic deconstruction of Gerrit's commentary on the game, and also of the way that it agreed or disagreed with the English language broadcast of the SABC by Kim Shippey, Chick Henderson and Alan Williams. And in the days before television came to South Africa, people would watch the game from the stands with radios clamped to their ears, leading to the phenomenon of Gerrit actually asking on air for people to turn their radios down to stop the feedback in his ear. The point, of course, is that people who had paid for a ticket would rather believe Gerrit's version of events than the evidence of their own eyes. The story comes back time and again, that's the Proustian bit, to Gerrit's preamble to the game, where he says, in Afrikaans of course, that this is the most important game in Springbok history. And to put that in context, the Lions won the first test in Newlands, and defeat at Loftus would mean they could only draw the 4-match series. But something in Gerrit's voice persuades his listeners that that is not going to happen, and in fact that calamity is just around the corner. And so it was. The Lions won 28-9, 5-0. It was then the heaviest defeat in Springbok history. They went on to win in Port Elizabeth, unlucky to only draw the last test. And I'm conscious while reading out these statistics that I've said this is a crossover book, not a sports book, and so I should shut up about unimportant things. What's important is the quality of the writing, the giddy ride back and forward through time, the fact that Dugald waited almost half a century to write his story, the wisdom and the humour that tumble from every page. But let me digress here. Sometimes on Cover to Cover, I have to read a book that I would never normally engage with, and it can become a fight between reading and doing something else, anything else. But with Yarnir, I actually found myself stopping because I didn't want it to end. So instead of sitting down and reading it in one gulp, I spent a week dipping in and out and finding that my curmudgeonly lockdown mood lifted every time. The two men who conspired to make Dugald's one and only test match so tough were the Lions halfback pair, Gareth Edwards and Phil Bennett. And here's where the book gets personal for me. When I was at school in the 1970s, I was a very, very ordinary lock forward with no quality, no ambition, and I seemed to spend a long British winters with numbed extremities and my head up someone else's backside, I really couldn't see the point of the game. One day, on the advice of my Latin teacher, I watched Wales play a test match and my life changed. Edwards and Bennett, together with Mervyn Davies, JPR Williams, JJ Williams, struck up a match in me that burns to this day. All 5 played in the second test at Loftus, and prompted by Yarnir, I went to YouTube. I watched the footage of the match and I fell in love all over again. The late, great Gordon Forbes wrote 2 seminal books about his tennis career, A Handful of Summers and Too Soon to Panic. This book belongs alongside those as an example of what can be achieved and how the chronicles of muddied oafs and flannelled fools can be so much more than we're used to. It is, of course, 10 out of 10.